The tomb was sealed before dawn. No priest sang the prayers. No torch burned in her honor. Beneath the damp stone floors of the monastery, a queen clawed at the earth with bleeding hands, her cries muffled by the soil pressing down upon her. They said her soul still whispers through the crypts of León, that in the silence between church bells, one can hear her call his name. A forbidden name. The name of the man who doomed her to be buried alive. This is the tragic story of Queen Urraca of León and Castile, a woman whose love defied kings, priests, and God himself. Her name was almost erased from the chronicles. Her memory cursed. Her heart entombed not by death, but by betrayal. Before we begin this journey through love, power, and damnation, remember to like, subscribe, and ring the bell for more forgotten histories the world tried to silence. Because tonight, we unearth the truth buried with the Queen. The winter winds of León howled like wolves across the plains, carrying with them the sound of bells from the great cathedral. Beneath those frozen skies, a girl was born into a kingdom bathed in fire and conquest. Her father, King Alfonso VI, had spent his life uniting the broken lands of Castile and León, carving borders with the edge of a sword. Her mother, the proud Queen Constance of Burgundy, had prayed for a son, a prince to inherit the empire her husband built. But fate, with its cruel humor, gave them a daughter instead. They named her Urraca, a name meaning magpie, a bird known for its fierce cry and unyielding will. From the moment she took her first breath, the court whispered that she was destined for misfortune. Women, they said, were born to obey, to marry, to bear heirs, not to rule. Yet in the candlelight of the royal chambers, her father looked into her dark, unblinking eyes and murmured, "Then she will rule with the strength of 10 sons." As the years passed, the promise took root. Urraca learned not the songs of the minstrels, but the language of treaties, the weight of crowns, and the cold logic of power. She listened in the great hall when knights returned from war, their armor glinting with blood and dust. She listened when her father cursed the name of the Moors, when alliances shifted like desert sands. She listened, and remembered. When her mother died, the court changed. The laughter died with her, replaced by the murmurs of men who thought the king's daughter was too proud, too wild, too aware of her own power. At 12, Urraca was sent to the monastery at Sahagun to learn piety and obedience. The nuns tried to tame her with silence. They gave her scriptures, prayers, and hours of solitude. But when the abbess scolded her for questioning the will of God, Urraca replied, "If God made me a woman, then he made me to test men." It was said that even the abbess could not find words after that. When her father grew old, his wars never ceased. And with each victory came betrayal, each treaty a new scar. In the heart of his kingdom, rebellion simmered, nobles grew restless, and foreign kings circled like vultures. Alfonso's only son, Sancho, the boy born of a later marriage, died young in battle. With no male heir left, the impossible happened. The throne of León would pass to a woman. The courtiers protested. The church hesitated. The Archbishop of Toledo called it unnatural. But Urraca stood before them all, cloaked in black, the crown heavy in her hands, and said, "If my blood is royal enough to die for this land, it is royal enough to rule it." And so she did. The bells of León rang out not for a king, but for a queen. Her coronation was unlike any in Europe. No husband stood beside her. No man claimed her power. She ruled in her own name, Queen Urraca I of León, Castile, and Galicia. The people, bewildered yet awed, called her La Imperatriz, the Empress. But power is a lonely companion. The same men who bent their knees in daylight sharpened daggers in the dark. Nobles whispered that a woman could never lead an army, that her crown was stolen from the rightful heirs. The clergy murmured that her independence was sin. And beyond the mountains, King Alfonso the battler of Aragon watched her ascension with both hunger and ambition. In her first year as queen, Urraca wrote letters, forged alliances, and quieted rebellion. She rode with her soldiers through the smoke of burned villages, her white horse cutting through the chaos like a ghost. She did not smile. She did not weep. Her people began to whisper a new name, the Lioness of León. But in the dark corridors of her palace, candlelight flickering against cold stone, Urraca often stood alone. She would trace her fingers along the carved edges of her father's throne, the same seat that had taken his life in wars and sorrow, and wonder if love and power could ever live side by side. Little did she know, love was already waiting for her. And it would not come as a blessing. It would come as the curse that would bury her alive. The night air in León was sharp, filled with the scent of rain and the faint smoke of burning tallow. Queen Urraca stood by the arched window of her fortress, the city stretching below like a sea of trembling lights. Somewhere in the distance, the bells tolled the midnight hour, slow, solemn, ancient. They echoed across the valleys she ruled, a reminder that her crown was not a gift of God, but a burden of blood. For in every shadow, there waited a man who wanted it taken from her. The nobles of León, fat with pride and land, loathed being ruled by a woman. They hid their scorn behind hollow smiles, speaking of loyalty while plotting rebellion. In the monasteries, monks wrote letters condemning her independence. A queen without a husband, they wrote, is a kingdom without a shepherd. And yet, she remained unbroken. Each morning Urraca held council with her generals, men hardened by years of war. She studied maps marked by rivers of red ink, the frontiers that divided her from her enemies. The Moors to the south, the Aragonese to the east, the traitors within her own walls. It seemed all of Spain was a fire she alone must contain. But even the strongest fire consumes itself in time. Her father had arranged, before his death, a marriage to secure the fragile peace between León and Aragon. Her groom-to-be was King Alfonso I of Aragon, known across the lands as El Battledor, the Battler. He was a man of unyielding iron, a soldier whose only language was war. To the church, he was a champion of Christendom. To his enemies, a storm in human form. When Urraca received the first letter from him, sealed with the black wax of Aragon, she read it alone. The words were polite yet cold, the kind of letter written by a man who saw marriage as strategy, not union. She could almost hear the clink of armor in every sentence. Our union will bind our kingdoms under one cross, he wrote. Our enemies will kneel before us. Not before you and I, she noticed, but us, as if they would become one body, one will. Yet she knew what that meant. His will. She closed the letter and stared into the fire until the seal melted away. In that quiet moment, she felt the weight of centuries pressing on her shoulders. No queen before her had ruled alone. None had dared to defy a king. But Urraca had learned something her father never did, that power gained through fear is always borrowed, never owned. When the wedding day arrived, the streets were flooded with soldiers, not song. Priests blessed the union, while banners of León and Aragon tangled in the cold wind, a foretelling of the storm to come. Alfonso, tall and austere, did not smile. His eyes, gray as winter, regarded her as a conquest. Urraca, draped in white and gold, looked straight ahead and said her vows with a voice that did not tremble. As the church bells tolled, the people whispered, "The lioness has wed the wolf." That night, when the doors of the royal chamber closed behind them, silence fell heavier than any war drum. Alfonso's touch was not that of a lover but of a ruler staking claim. His voice was a command. His heart, if he had one, was a battlefield. In the weeks that followed, their alliance began to rot from within. Alfonso treated her throne as his own. He replaced her loyal guards with his soldiers, seized lands in her name, and spoke over her in council. The courtiers began to call him King of León, as though she were already forgotten. But Urraca was no shadow queen. One morning, before the gathered nobles, she rose from her seat and said, "León bows to no man but its sovereign. And I am she." The room fell silent. The soldiers stared, uncertain if they should draw their swords or lower their eyes. Alfonso's jaw tightened, his fingers clenching the hilt of his blade. Their marriage had become a duel, one waged not with steel, but with pride. As Urraca left the hall, her steps echoed like the beat of a drum. She knew what her defiance would cost her. But she also knew something else. If she surrendered now, the crown that had survived centuries of war would die with her. And so began the reign of the Lioness of León. a queen who would rather burn than kneel. But beyond the walls of her fortress, another fire was already kindling, one not of war, but of forbidden desire. And that fire would consume everything. The storms that swept through León that winter were said to be unnatural, black, unending, filled with lightning that split the sky like the wrath of God. To the peasants, it was an omen. To the monks, divine punishment. But to Queen Urraca, it was simply reflection, the heavens raging as she did, trapped in a union forged not by love, but by necessity. Her husband, Alfonso the Battler, ruled as though the marriage had placed a sword in his hand rather than a crown upon his head. He commanded the court, gave orders to her ministers, and spoke of himself as King of León. Urraca watched in silence at first, her eyes cold, calculating, waiting for his arrogance to show its cracks. It did not take long. Within weeks of their wedding, the people began to see what she already knew. Alfonso's rule was iron, merciless and absolute. He taxed the nobles into rebellion, stripped the clergy of their privileges, and turned even his allies into enemies. His soldiers, foreign men from Aragon, filled the streets, treating her citizens as conquered prey. León trembled beneath their boots. At night, Urraca and Alfonso dined at opposite ends of the long royal table, their torches flickering between them like a line of fire. Sometimes they spoke brief, bitter words that carried more venom than affection. "Your people are disloyal," he would say. "And yours are thieves," she replied. "You need my armies to rule. I need nothing but my name." Those who served them swore that every conversation was a battle, every glance a wound. It was not a marriage, it was a war disguised as love. But beneath the cruelty, there were moments, fleeting, fragile, where the air softened. On certain nights, when the rain beat against the fortress walls, Urraca would remember the man she had seen on their wedding day, the warrior whose armor gleamed beneath the cathedral's light. For a heartbeat, she had believed there might be something more in him. A glimmer of honor. A spark of understanding. But in the morning, he was always the battler again. Cold. Relentless. The chroniclers say she sought counsel from the church, pleading for annulment. The bishops hesitated. A queen seeking separation from her king was scandal enough, but to defy Alfonso the Battler was to invite ruin. The church refused her. So she did what only a true monarch could do, she began to fight back. Her letters, once formal and obedient, turned sharp. She reclaimed her titles, reappointed her loyal guards, and quietly summoned her nobles to court. When Alfonso's men tried to seize her treasuries, she moved them to secret vaults beneath the monastery. When he ordered her to accompany him to Aragon, she refused. One morning she mounted her horse in full view of the palace, donned her father's armor, silver, worn, and magnificent, and rode through the streets of León. The people cheered. They called her Reina sin miedo, the fearless queen. From that day forward, Alfonso's control began to crumble. Their armies clashed not only against Moorish enemies but against each other. The civil war that followed was a storm of blood and betrayal. Brother fought brother, and Spain itself seemed to split down the middle, one half ruled by a king who believed in conquest, the other by a queen who believed in survival. The royal marriage that was meant to unite kingdoms instead drowned them in chaos. And yet, amid the ash and ruin, Urraca began to feel the stirrings of something she thought she had buried: loneliness. She had defied the church, humiliated her husband, and earned the respect of her people, but power cannot warm the heart. In the quiet hours before dawn, when the soldiers slept and the torches burned low, she would walk alone through the castle's empty halls, her footsteps echoing like memories. It was there, in that silence, that she first saw him, the man who would change everything. He was not a king, nor a noble. Just a knight, weary, scarred, and loyal. His name was Pedro González de Lara, and though she did not yet know it, his love would be the beginning of her end. He came to her court under a banner of loyalty, not ambition. Pedro González de Lara was a knight of noble bearing but modest estate, a man forged not in royal halls but on the battlefield. His armor bore the dents of 100 skirmishes, his hands the scars of service. Yet his eyes, dark and unwavering, carried something the courtiers of León had long forgotten: sincerity. Urraca first noticed him during an audience in the Great Hall, when he spoke against the cruelty of Alfonso's soldiers toward the people. He did not lower his gaze as others did. He did not tremble in her presence, nor flatter her with hollow words. He spoke plainly, his voice steady. "A ruler's strength," he said, "is measured not by fear, but by the peace she grants her people." The hall fell silent. The courtiers shifted uneasily, expecting the queen to rebuke him for such boldness. But Urraca only smiled, faintly, almost imperceptibly. It was the first true smile she had allowed herself in months. In the days that followed, Pedro became one of her trusted commanders. He rode beside her through the valleys of León, inspecting the wounded villages torn by civil war. While others sought her favor through flattery, he sought it through service. His counsel was calm, measured, wise beyond his station. At night, when the fires of the encampment burned low, they would walk among the tents, speaking in whispers. He spoke of honor and mercy, she spoke of loneliness and the heavy silence that comes with power. And somewhere between those conversations, something sacred and forbidden began to bloom. Their love did not begin with a kiss. It began with trust, something far rarer. To the world, Urraca was still the queen who defied her husband, the woman who ruled through rebellion and iron will. But when she was with Pedro, she allowed herself to be human again. For the first time since her mother's death, she laughed. For the first time since her father's burial, she felt alive. But love, in a royal court, is never hidden for long. Rumors began to coil through the corridors of León like smoke. Monks wrote of the queen's unholy affection. Nobles whispered of treachery. Some claimed to have seen Pedro leave her chambers in the dead of night. The church called it adultery. Alfonso called it war. From Aragon, the battler returned with vengeance in his heart. His banners darkened the horizon. His messengers carried only threats, surrender or ruin. But Urraca was no longer the frightened bride who had once bowed to him. She was now the lioness, and she would not yield. Pedro stood by her side as the armies gathered. His loyalty to her was not of ambition, but of devotion. He fought like a man possessed, defending her city, her people, her name. But for all their courage, the odds were cruel. Alfonso's forces swept across the land, leaving fire in their wake. The chronicles say the queen rode into battle herself, her armor gleaming beneath the storm, her banner marked not by a cross but by the golden lion of León. They say that when her horse fell, Pedro lifted her onto his own and carried her through the smoke, never once letting go of her hand. For a brief, shining moment, it seemed that even fate itself had bent to their love. But the world of kings and priests does not forgive what it cannot control. When the war ended, Urraca reclaimed her throne, but at a terrible cost. The church refused to bless her rule. Her husband, humiliated, withdrew but left her name stained. And Pedro, her beloved Pedro, became a target of envy and hate. In the eyes of her enemies, he was no longer a loyal knight. He was a corrupter, a seducer, a traitor who had bewitched the queen. The bishops called it mortal sin. The nobles called it treason. And yet, despite every danger, Urraca would not cast him aside. She met him one last night in the gardens of the royal palace, beneath the moonlight that silvered the olive trees. The war had aged them both. Her face was pale, his eyes hollowed by sleepless nights. "Go," she whispered. "They will kill you if you stay." He shook his head. "Let them try. My life is already yours." She reached for his face, her hand trembling. "If God had been kinder," she said softly, "we would have been born without crowns." Pedro smiled faintly. "And if love were not forbidden," he replied, "you would not be the legend they'll make of you." Their final kiss was not one of passion but a farewell, two souls parting beneath the gaze of heaven and history. When he rode away at dawn, the wind carried with him the scent of roses and ash. Urraca watched until he vanished beyond the hills, knowing that what they shared would one day be buried, not beneath stone, but beneath shame. Yet even as the world turned against her, she refused to repent. For in a life ruled by men war, and crowns she had dared to love, and that, perhaps, was her greatest act of rebellion. But rebellion, like love, has its price. And Urraca's would soon be paid in full. The city of León, once vibrant with festivals and the clatter of merchant carts, had grown silent under the shadow of suspicion. Rumors of Queen Urraca's forbidden love spread like wildfire, whispered from servant to noble, from priest to soldier. The chronicles, careful to disguise their horror in ink, called it scandal. The people, frightened and reverent, called it a curse. Pedro González de Lara, the knight whose loyalty had earned her trust, became the target of quiet malice. Nobles sent spies to track his movements. Priests invoked God's wrath in sermons meant to shame him. Even Alfonso the Battler, still nursing wounds to his pride, plotted vengeance from afar. And yet, Pedro remained unwavering, bound not by ambition but by love, a devotion stronger than steel, deeper than any oath sworn on blood or altar. Urraca knew the dangers. Every glance they shared in the corridors of the palace was watched. Every secret meeting in the gardens risked betrayal. Yet she could not stay away from him. In the hush of twilight, when the torchlight flickered and the city held its breath, they would meet. Words were unnecessary. The brush of a hand, the tilt of a head, spoke volumes. "Why do you risk so much for me?" she asked one evening, her voice trembling beneath the weight of her crown. Pedro's eyes met hers, unwavering. "Because you are worth every blade, every whisper, every prayer they raise against us." They knew the stakes. A king, scorned and vengeful, could destroy them both. The church condemned their hearts, as if love itself were heresy. And yet, in the rare moments of solitude, Urraca felt a freedom she had never known, the ability to be not a queen, but a woman. But love in a royal court is never safe. The spies of León did not rest. One evening, a message sealed in black wax arrived at her chambers. "The knight leaves tonight, or death follows both of you." Alfonso's hand was already upon the city. Pedro's enemies closed in. The queen faced a choice no monarch should ever face: abandon the man who had given her warmth in a world of stone, or face the wrath of her husband, the church, and the nobility. In the secrecy of the night, beneath the moonlight silvering the palace walls, she found him. Pedro knelt, not in submission, but in urgency. "We cannot flee together," he whispered. "They would follow us, even into exile. But I will fight for you, Queen. Always." Her heart ached. The weight of the crown pressed against her chest, heavier than any stone in the fortress. "Then fight wisely," she said. "For love may be our strength, but it is also our undoing." Soon after, the city descended into chaos. Nobles revolted, questioning her right to rule. Soldiers loyal to Alfonso the Battler raided towns, burning homes and cutting down those who supported her. The people of León, caught between king and queen, hid in cellars and fields, praying for the storm to pass. Amid this violence, Pedro led her forces with skill and courage, defending villages and rallying citizens, each act of bravery another thread weaving their dangerous love into legend. Yet even victory carried a shadow. Alfonso, defeated in skirmishes but unyielding in ambition, still controlled the narrative. Monks wrote sermons condemning Urraca's heart. Chroniclers of distant lands hinted that she had betrayed her people. And all the while, whispers of the forbidden affair grew louder, reaching ears that should never have known. The queen, once proud and unyielding, now realized that love could be as perilous as war. Every smile she allowed herself, every touch she shared with Pedro, carried the weight of betrayal, betrayal not of a man, but of a throne, a kingdom, and the expectations of a world that did not forgive desire. And yet she did not falter. Because within that danger lay truth. Urraca would not allow fear to dictate her heart. In a world that demanded obedience, she chose rebellion. In a time that worshipped power, she chose love. And that choice, though small in the eyes of history, was monumental in the eyes of a queen who had never known freedom. But freedom, like fire, can consume even the strongest. The knights of León, the bishops, the nobles, all watched from the shadows. And somewhere, in a chamber lined with stone, Alfonso the Battler's fury boiled like molten iron. He would not forgive. He would not forget. And thus, the stage was set for a reckoning. A reckoning not fought with swords alone, but with hearts and shadows, whispers and betrayal. For in loving Pedro González de Lara, Urraca had defied more than a king. She had defied the world itself. The sun rose over León one morning, but it brought no warmth. The city, once vibrant with life and the hum of markets, lay heavy beneath a shroud of tension. Urraca, the lioness of León, now understood the cruel truth of power. A crown can shield a head but not a heart, and a throne built on defiance is a throne always under siege. Her enemies had grown bolder. Alfonso the Battler's armies pressed relentlessly against her borders. Nobles within her court, resentful and ambitious, plotted in hushed chambers, their daggers hidden beneath velvet robes. Even the church, which had once tempered war with the promise of divine authority, now whispered sermons condemning her, calling her heart a vessel of sin. In those moments, Queen Urraca felt the full weight of solitude. The man she loved, Pedro González de Lara, remained at her side in battle, but even his courage could not shield her from the claws of betrayal. He was a beacon in the darkness, yes, but the shadows of envy and hatred were everywhere. The chronicles tell of a single night that changed everything. She had summoned her council to plan the defense of the western provinces. The hall was tense, the torchlight flickering over faces drawn tight with fear and suspicion. As Urraca spoke, outlining strategies and rallying her troops, a noble interrupted, a man once loyal, now corrupted by ambition. "Your Majesty," he hissed, "why do you place trust in the knight? Do you not see he sows discord? Your people suffer while he chases shadows of affection." The queen's eyes narrowed. "Loyalty is rare, and courage rarer still. Pedro González has both. And I will not condemn virtue because it offends your pride." The noble's face turned red. He leaned close, whispering venom into the ears of others, and soon the seeds of mutiny had been planted. It was not long before the revolt broke into open conflict. The cities of León, divided and weary, erupted into chaos. Soldiers loyal to Urraca clashed with those swayed by Alfonso's promises. Villages burned. Merchants fled. Children wept. And through it all, the queen rode among her people, a symbol of defiance, a lioness in human form. Yet the most devastating betrayal came from within the palace. The abbots, priests, and trusted advisors who had once sworn oaths to her now conspired with her enemies. One by one, they severed her alliances, spreading lies of adultery, treason, and ambition. Urraca, once untouchable in her courage, now felt the creeping dread of isolation. And then, whispers began about her fate, dark stories of punishment whispered in the corridors of the monastery where she had sought refuge. They said that a woman who defied kings and the church could not be allowed to live unbroken. Some claimed she would be sent to a convent to repent. Others whispered something far darker, that the monks, under secret orders, would seal her alive within the cold stone walls, leaving her to suffocate in silence, buried with only the shadows as witness. Whether legend or truth, the terror seeped into every stone of the city, every breath of the queen. Even Pedro could not fully shield her from the inevitability of what was coming. The final confrontation came in the winter of her life. Alfonso the Battler marched with fury, his banners dark against the snow, while rebels from within her court struck simultaneously. The palace, once a sanctuary, became a battlefield. Arrows pierced tapestries, swords cut through silence, and screams echoed through the halls that had once rung with the sounds of loyalty and music. In the chaos, Urraca saw the faces of those she had trusted, twisted with greed, hatred, and fear. She fought, as she always did, with the strength of the throne and the courage of the lioness, but even her valor could not stop what history had decreed. Pedro, holding her hand as they escaped through secret passages, whispered, "They will not take you from me. But fate is a cruel master." The palace fell, and with it, the queen's freedom. She was captured, torn from her knight, and sent to a monastery under guard. The chroniclers are divided on what followed. Some say she was forced to live out her days in penance, stripped of power and love. Others whisper the unspeakable, that she was entombed alive, the walls of her cell closing upon her as she called out for Pedro, her voice lost to stone. Even in defeat, she remained defiant. Her eyes, though shadowed with fear, still burned with the fire of rebellion. Her final thoughts, historians believe, were not of the throne she had lost, nor the kingdom that had been torn apart, but of love forbidden, the one thing stronger than fear, stronger than death itself. And so, Queen Urraca's reign ended not with triumph, but with tragedy, a woman betrayed by men, by church, by crown, and yet unbowed in spirit, her story destined to echo through the ages. Centuries have passed, yet the name of Queen Urraca of León remains a whisper in the corridors of history, a ghostly echo in the shadows of cathedrals, palaces, and monasteries. Her story, once buried beneath the stones of betrayal and the weight of crowns, survived not in the official chronicles, sanitized and incomplete, but in the murmurs of those who feared, admired, or mourned her. They called her the Lioness of León. They called her cursed. They called her brave. Some said her spirit roamed the halls of her former palaces at night, a spectral reminder of the woman who had dared to love and rule in a world determined to silence her. Others claimed that every man who betrayed his lover would hear her cry echo in the wind, a warning to those who dared to exploit hearts for ambition. History, however, is seldom kind. For every legend, there are those who wish to erase it. Urraca's victories were overshadowed by the scandals that surrounded her, her courage painted as hubris, her love as sin. Alfonso the Battler's conquests were celebrated in the annals of Aragon, while Urraca's defense of her kingdom was quietly footnoted, her sacrifices hidden beneath layers of political and ecclesiastical judgment. Yet even in obscurity, her influence endured. The cities she had saved remembered her bravery. The villages she had protected whispered her name long after the castles fell. And her love, forbidden, tragic, and relentless, became the template of stories that would outlive kings and wars, tales of women whose hearts were stronger than the swords that sought to crush them, of rulers whose courage refused to bow to the cruelty of men. The Church, which had once condemned her, could not entirely erase her memory. Monks wrote of her courage in hushed tones, framing her actions as examples of divine testing. Nobles, once enemies, later spoke of her strategic brilliance with reluctant admiration. And Pedro González de Lara, whose loyalty and love had defied both crown and church, lived on in legend as the knight whose devotion transcended fear and death. There are those who claim that the Curse of Urraca is not supernatural, but moral, a reckoning written into the very fabric of human conscience. Betrayal, injustice, and the abuse of power are punished, not by ghosts or hexes, but by memory itself. Those who remember her remember not just her suffering, but the courage it took to endure it. Her name became a silent warning to tyrants and betrayers alike. Love and loyalty, though fragile, are forces that outlast thrones and armies. And yet, for every historian who records her life, for every poet who mourns her tragedy, there remains a question as chilling as it is enduring. Did the world ever truly understand her? Was she merely a woman destroyed by circumstance, or a queen who redefined the boundaries of power and passion in a time that sought to contain both? Somewhere in León, in the quiet of night when the wind rattles the shutters of abandoned palaces and the bells toll without ceremony, one can almost hear her voice, a lament, a whisper, a warning. Not for vengeance, but for remembrance. For Urraca's life, her love, and her defiance demand acknowledgement. She is the queen who refused to bow, the woman who chose the peril of her heart over the safety of obedience. And that choice, tragic as it was, became her eternal legacy. Her story has inspired generations of women who dared to defy expectation, of rulers who sought justice over convenience, of lovers who risked everything for the heart. The Lioness of León endures because she embodies a truth older than crowns, older than kingdoms. That courage is remembered, and love, even forbidden, even doomed, is immortal. The stone that may have once trapped her alive could not contain her spirit. The history that tried to diminish her could not silence her legend. And the centuries, relentless as they are, have only ensured that Queen Urraca lives on, not as a footnote, but as a symbol of defiance, passion, and the indomitable human heart. Her curse, if it exists, is simple. Those who betray or suppress the soul of another shall carry her memory with them, an unyielding reminder of the cost of cruelty. And for those who remember her rightly, her life is a blessing, a tale of bravery, love, and a fierce refusal to surrender even when the world demands it. The lioness of León may have fallen, but her roar echoes still.